The courthouse steps were slick with October rain when Detective Sarah Chen first saw the photograph that would unravel everything. 23 years had passed since Eva Martinez disappeared from the parking lot of Riverside High School in Asheville, North Carolina. Her backpack found near the bleachers. Her biology textbook soaked through with morning dew. The case had gone cold before Sarah even graduated from the police academy. Now, in 2024, a construction crew renovating the old community center had found something behind a false wall in the basement. A small metal box containing Polaroids, a charm bracelet with the initials EM, and a journal with entries that made Sarah's hands tremble as she read them under the fluorescent lights of the evidence room. The rain hammered against the windows of the police station, creating rivers down the glass that distorted the view of Main Street below. Sarah sat at her desk, the box's contents spread before her like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across 2 decades. The photographs showed Eva, 17 years old, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that held both defiance and vulnerability. In one image, she was laughing, her head thrown back, captured in a moment of pure joy that now felt like evidence of everything that had been stolen from her. In another, she stood alone by the French Broad River, her arms wrapped around herself, looking over her shoulder as if she knew someone was watching. The journal entries were harder to read. Eva's handwriting was careful, almost architectural in its precision, each letter formed with the attention of someone who believed their words mattered. The early entries from September 2001 talked about her AP classes, her work at the public library, her mother's double shifts at the textile mill. But as Sarah turned the pages, the tone shifted. Eva wrote about feeling watched, about finding notes in her locker that said things like, "I see you," and "You can't hide from me," about a shadow that followed her home from school, staying just far enough back that she could never quite make out who it was. "Chun, you're going to want to see this." Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, his face grave. He was a mountain of a man, 58 years old, with silver threading through his close-cropped hair. He'd been a rookie officer when Eva disappeared, one of the dozens who had searched the woods around the high school, calling her name until their voices went hoarse. The lab just called. They got DNA off one of those Polaroids. Skin cells from whoever was holding the camera. Sarah's pulse quickened. And they ran it through Cody's. No match in the criminal database, but Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening. They ran it through the genealogy services too, like they did with the Golden State Killer. Built a family tree. Sarah, the profile matches someone local. Someone who's been here this whole time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound that seemed suddenly too loud in the silence that followed. Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Who?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph of a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was standing in front of a classroom, a chalkboard behind him covered in mathematical equations. "Robert Sullivan. He's been teaching at Riverside High for 32 years. Math department, well-liked, coaches the chess club. His daughter just started her residency at Mission Hospital. His wife runs the community garden program." Marcus paused, his voice dropping. He was Eva's calculus teacher in 2001. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Sarah had grown up in Asheville, had gone to Riverside High herself, though years after Eva disappeared. She remembered Mr. Sullivan. Everyone called him Mr. S. Remembered his patient explanations during tutoring sessions, the way he stayed late to help struggling students, the college recommendation letters he wrote that were so glowing they seemed to open doors by themselves. The community loved him. Parents requested their children be placed in his classes. Former students came back to visit, crediting him with their success in engineering programs and medical schools. "That can't be right," Sarah said. Though even as the words left her mouth, she knew how many times she'd heard that phrase in her career. It was always the neighbor who seemed so normal, the coach everyone trusted, the teacher who volunteered on weekends. The DNA could be contaminated. 23 years. The lab triple-checked. "The match is solid, Sarah. 99.7% probability." Marcus moved closer, his voice low. "I need you to handle this carefully. This is going to tear this town apart. Sullivan's not just some teacher. He was named North Carolina Educator of the Year in 2015. He's on the school board. His family has been in Asheville for 4 generations. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah looked back at the journal, at Eva's careful handwriting describing the feeling of being hunted. She turned to an entry from October 15, 2001, exactly 1 week before Eva vanished. Mr. Sullivan asked me to stay after class again today. He said he wanted to discuss my college applications, help me prepare for the MIT interview. But the way he looked at me when he closed the door. Mom always says I have good instincts. My instincts told me to leave. But he's my teacher. He's trying to help me. Why do I feel so afraid of someone who's only been kind? The next entry was shorter, written in handwriting that looked rushed, almost frantic. He knows where I live. I saw his car parked across the street last night, just sitting there with the lights off. When I told Mom, she said I was being paranoid, that Mr. Sullivan was a good man who was going out of his way to help a student whose family couldn't afford a guidance counselor. She said I should be grateful. But grateful doesn't feel like this. Grateful doesn't make my skin crawl. The final entry was dated October 22, 2001, the day Eva disappeared. I'm going to tell someone today. Principal Hayes or maybe the school counselor. I don't care if no one believes me. I don't care if Mom gets angry. Something is very wrong, and I can't pretend anymore that it isn't. Mr. Sullivan cornered me by the library yesterday and told me he'd secured me a special opportunity. An after-school study session at his house, just the 2 of us, to prepare for the MIT interview. When I said no, his face changed. Just for a second, I saw something underneath the kindness. Something cold and patient and absolutely certain. He said, Eva, I've invested a lot in your future. Don't throw away this chance. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like a threat. After that, the pages were blank. Sarah closed the journal carefully, as if it were something sacred. In a way, it was a voice speaking across 23 years of silence, a girl trying to protect herself in a world that kept telling her she was wrong to be afraid. She thought about her own daughter, 12 years old, who believed that teachers were safe, that adults in positions of authority could be trusted absolutely. The world Eva had lived in was a world where a girl's instincts were dismissed as paranoia, where gratitude was expected even when every nerve screamed danger. We need to bring him in, Sarah said. Now, before anyone tips him off. Marcus nodded slowly. I've already got units positioned near his house and the school. But Sarah. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too many cases like this. Too many families destroyed by the revelation that the person they trusted most was the person they should have feared. When we arrest him, when this becomes public, there are going to be people who don't believe it, who can't believe it. Sullivan's taught over 3,000 students. He's been a constant in this community for 3 decades. Some of those people are going to fight us every step of the way. Let them fight, Sarah said quietly. Eva doesn't have a voice anymore. Someone needs to speak for her. The rain had intensified, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and darker gray. Sarah gathered the journal and photographs, sealing them carefully back into evidence bags. She thought about Eva's mother, Eva Martinez, who still lived in the same small house on Maple Street where she'd raised her daughter alone after Eva's father died in a factory accident. Maria had never stopped searching, never stopped believing that one day someone would find answers. She'd aged decades in the years since Eva vanished, her hair gone white, her hands permanently twisted from arthritis and grief. Sarah had visited her 3 months ago, a courtesy call on the anniversary of Eva's disappearance. Maria had served her coffee in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and sorrow, showing Sarah the shrine she'd built in Eva's bedroom, photographs from every year of her daughter's life, report cards covered in straight A's, the acceptance letter from MIT that had arrived 2 weeks after Eva vanished, offering a full scholarship for the following fall. She was going to be an engineer, Maria had said, her voice cracking. She was going to build bridges. She was going to make the world safer for people to cross from one side to the other. Now Sarah would have to visit Maria again, but this time with news that would be both a relief and a devastation. the knowledge that her daughter had been right to be afraid, that her instincts had been warning her about a predator who hid behind a mask of kindness and care. The phone on Sarah's desk rang, sharp and insistent. She picked it up, already knowing what the call would be about. "Detective Chen, this is dispatch. We've got units in position, ready to execute the warrant on your order." Sarah looked at the photograph of Robert Sullivan one more time. The kind eyes, the gentle smile, the face of a man the community had trusted with their children for 3 decades. She thought about all the students who'd sat in his classroom, who'd stayed after school for extra help, who'd been alone with him in exactly the kind of situation Eva had tried to avoid. How many others had there been? How many had felt that same crawling unease but dismissed it because everyone said Mr. Sullivan was safe? "Execute the warrant," Sarah said. "Bring him in." Eva Martinez had been a girl who carried the weight of 2 worlds. In the yearbook photos Sarah studied in the days before the arrest, Eva's smile seemed to hold knowledge beyond her 17 years. The understanding that comes from being the daughter of an immigrant, from translating documents and phone calls since childhood, from watching your mother's hands bleed from factory work and knowing that your education was the bridge to something better. Maria Martinez had come to Asheville from Guadalajara in 1982, following her husband Miguel, who'd found work at the American Enca textile plant. They'd lived in a small apartment near the river, saving every spare dollar, dreaming in Spanish but working in English. Eva had been born in 1984, on a December morning when snow covered the Blue Ridge Mountains and Maria labored for 16 hours, holding Miguel's hand and praying in 2 languages. They'd named her Eva because it meant life, and she'd been exactly that, their reason for every sacrifice, every double shift, every moment of backbreaking work. Miguel had died when Eva was 8, crushed by machinery at the factory when a safety protocol failed. The settlement money had been enough for Maria to buy the small house on Maple Street, but nothing more. She'd taken a job at a different textile plant, then added weekend shifts cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods on the other side of town. Eva had learned early to be self-sufficient, making her own breakfast before school, doing her homework at the kitchen table while her mother slept off exhaustion, walking to the public library every afternoon because it was warm and safe and full of books that showed her worlds beyond Asheville. The librarian, Patricia Coleman, remembered Eva vividly even 23 years later. Sarah had interviewed her at the old Carnegie Library building, now a historical landmark but still smelling of aged paper and possibilities. Patricia was 74 now, her hands shaking slightly as she poured tea into delicate cups, but her memory was sharp as glass. "Eva was special," Patricia said, her voice soft with remembrance. "Not just smart, though Lord knows that child had a mind like a steel trap, but kind. Genuinely kind. She'd help the younger children find books, reading to them when their parents were busy. She'd organize the shelves without being asked, always making sure the Spanish language section was well maintained, because she said people shouldn't have to search hard for stories in their own language." Patricia pulled out a box from beneath her desk, opening it to reveal a stack of index cards covered in Eva's precise handwriting. "She made these for me. A complete catalog system for our local history collection. Spent months on it, cross-referencing everything. She said history mattered, that we had to preserve it or risk forgetting who we were." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "When she disappeared, I kept thinking she'd walk through those doors any day, apologizing for being gone, asking if I needed help reshelving. But she never did." Sarah learned that Eva had worked at the library 15 hours a week, earning minimum wage that she'd saved meticulously in a college fund. She'd walked there every day after school, a 20-minute journey that took her past the high school football field, through the park where families picnicked on summer evenings, and across the bridge over the French Broad River. It was a route she knew by heart, one she described in her journal with the attention of someone who saw beauty in ordinary things. The way light filtered through oak leaves, the sound of the river running high after rain, the smell of wood smoke from chimneys when autumn arrived. But in those final weeks before her disappearance, Eva's journal entries revealed how that familiar route had become a corridor of fear. She'd written about feeling watched during her walk home, about the car that seemed to appear too often on streets she traveled, about the sensation of eyes on her back when she studied at the library's windowside table. She'd started varying her route, taking longer paths through neighborhoods, asking friends to walk with her when possible. But in a small town in 2001, before cell phones were ubiquitous, before stranger danger was the constant refrain it would become, a 17-year-old girl walking alone was still considered normal, safe, unremarkable. Sarah interviewed Eva's closest friends, now women in their 40s with families and mortgages and lives that Eva would never have. Jennifer Park, who'd sat beside Eva in AP English, met Sarah at a coffee shop downtown, her hands wrapped around a mug as if she needed the warmth despite the heated interior. "We were supposed to go to MIT together," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'd planned it since sophomore year. We were going to be roommates, study engineering, change the world." She laughed bitterly. "I did go to MIT, got my degree in mechanical engineering, worked for Boeing for 15 years. But every achievement felt hollow because Eva should have been there too. She was smarter than me, more driven, more passionate about everything. She deserved that life." Jennifer described Eva as someone who'd carried hope like a physical thing, tangible and bright. Even when her mother worked punishing hours, even when money was so tight they ate rice and beans for weeks at a time, Eva had believed in the future. She'd plastered her bedroom walls with pictures of bridges, Golden Gate, Brooklyn, Tower Bridge in London, and she told Jennifer that bridges were the most important structures humans could build because they connected separated things, made the impossible journey possible. "That's what she wanted to be," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. A bridge between her mother's world and her own future, between the life she was born into and the life she dreamed of creating. She wanted to make it easier for other people like her to cross over, to reach possibilities that seemed impossibly far away. Sarah learned that Eva had tutored younger students in math and science, refusing payment but accepting occasional meals from grateful families. She'd volunteered at the community center, teaching English as a second language classes to recent immigrants, many of them workers at the same textile plants where her mother labored. She'd been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship, an achievement so rare from Riverside High that the principal had announced it at an assembly, and Eva had stood on stage, uncomfortable with the attention, her face flushed with pride and embarrassment. Robert Sullivan had been at that assembly. Sarah had found photographs in the school archives. Sullivan standing off to the side, clapping, his eyes fixed on Eva with an expression that could have been pride or could have been something else entirely, something possessive and dark. Eva's calculus teacher, her mentor, or so everyone had believed. Sullivan had identified Eva early in her sophomore year as exceptional, someone worth cultivating. He'd given her additional assignments, challenging problems that went beyond the standard curriculum. He'd written her recommendation letters for summer programs, for scholarship applications, for MIT itself. He'd stayed after school to tutor her, one-on-one sessions that Eva had initially appreciated, grateful for the attention from a teacher who seemed genuinely invested in her success. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. Eva's journal captured the change, the moment when mentorship began to feel like surveillance, when kindness began to curdle into something that made her skin crawl. She'd written about Sullivan asking personal questions, about her mother's work schedule, about whether she had a boyfriend, about her plans for after graduation. She'd written about the way he'd stand too close, blocking the doorway when she tried to leave, making comments about her appearance disguised as compliments. "You look mature for 17, he'd said once, and Eva had written that sentence in her journal 3 times, as if repetition could help her understand why it made her feel so deeply wrong. She tried to distance herself, declining the one-on-one tutoring sessions, making excuses about being busy with other classes. But Sullivan had persisted, showing up at the library where she worked, offering her rides home when it rained, appearing at school events where he had no reason to be. Eva had felt trapped. If she complained, who would believe her? Sullivan was beloved, respected, a teacher who dedicated his life to education. She was just a girl with an overactive imagination, someone who should be grateful for the attention of a mentor willing to help a student from a poor family reach beyond her circumstances. The day before Eva disappeared, she'd made a decision. Sarah found evidence of it in a note tucked into the back of Eva's journal, a draft of a letter to Principal Hayes, carefully worded but unmistakable in its message. "I am writing to formally request a transfer out of Mr. Sullivan's calculus class and to report behavior that makes me uncomfortable. Over the past 2 months, Mr. Sullivan has made repeated personal inquiries, has followed me to my place of work, and has appeared at locations outside of school without explanation. When I have attempted to maintain professional boundaries, he has implied that his recommendation letters and support are contingent on my continued acceptance of his attention. I recognize that Mr. Sullivan is highly respected, but I believe his behavior toward me crosses appropriate lines, and I am concerned for my safety. Eva had never sent the letter. According to the timeline Sarah constructed from witness statements and school records, Eva had disappeared during the 20-minute window between the end of her last class and the start of her library shift. Students had seen her walking toward the parking lot. One witness, now a veterinarian living in Charlotte, remembered seeing Sullivan's car in that same parking lot, which was unusual because teachers typically parked in a different area. I didn't think anything of it at the time, Dr. Rachel Kim told Sarah during a phone interview. Mr. S was always doing extra stuff for students. I figured he was meeting someone for tutoring. But Eva looked, I don't know, tense? She was walking fast, almost running, and she kept looking over her shoulder. That was the last confirmed sighting of Eva Martinez. Her backpack had been found near the bleachers, soaked through from rain that had started falling around 4 p.m. Her biology textbook was inside, along with her carefully organized notes, her graphing calculator, and a photograph of her mother that she carried everywhere. Her wallet was missing, along with her keys and the small silver cross necklace she never removed. The initial investigation had focused on the possibility of a runaway, a narrative that Maria Martinez had fought against with every fiber of her being. Eva wouldn't run away, she'd insisted. Eva had too much to live for, too many dreams on the verge of coming true. But investigators had noted the stress Eva was under, the pressure of being a first-generation college student, the financial struggles, the weight of being her mother's hope for a better future. They'd suggested that maybe Eva had simply been overwhelmed, that she'd needed to escape the expectations pressing down on her from all sides. Maria had known better. A mother knows her child, knows the difference between stress and terror, between running away and being taken. She'd spent 23 years trying to make investigators understand what her daughter had known in those final days. That danger wore a familiar face. That predators didn't lurk in shadows but stood in classrooms, earning trust and respect while hunting. Now, Sarah stood in the interrogation room, watching Robert Sullivan through one-way glass, and thought about all the years Maria Martinez had been right without anyone believing her. Sullivan sat calmly at the metal table, his hands folded, his expression more confused than worried. He'd asked for a lawyer immediately, but his body language radiated certainty. The confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences, who'd spent 3 decades being praised and protected, who believed that his reputation was armor strong enough to deflect any accusation. Sarah thought about Eva's journal, about the girl who'd wanted to build bridges, who'd carried hope like a torch even when the world told her she was wrong to be afraid. She thought about all the students who'd passed through Sullivan's classroom in the years since Eva disappeared, and she wondered how many of them had felt that same crawling unease, that same instinct screaming danger while everyone around them insisted they were safe. The door to the observation room opened, and Marcus Webb entered, carrying a thick file folder. The search warrant turned up a storage unit Sullivan's been renting for 20 years. Climate-controlled, paid in cash, registered under his mother's maiden name. Marcus's face was grim. "You're going to want to see what they found." He opened the folder, spreading photographs across the table. Storage shelves filled with boxes, each one labeled with a year. Inside the boxes, more photographs, more journals, more small objects that had belonged to girls. Not just Eva. Others. At least 6 others, spanning Sullivan's entire teaching career. Each one a student he'd identified as special, as worth cultivating, as someone whose trust he could exploit. Sarah's stomach turned. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern, a systematic hunting of vulnerable girls, a predator who'd perfected his method over decades. Some of the girls had graduated and moved away, never knowing how close they'd come to disaster. Others had simply stopped attending his class, their unease dismissed as teenage drama. And Eva had tried to stop it, had tried to speak up, and she'd paid with her life. "We're going to get him," Sarah said quietly. her eyes fixed on Sullivan's calm face through the glass. For Eva and for all the others, we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what he is. Marcus nodded, but his expression was troubled. Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. When this becomes public, there's going to be a reckoning in this town. Sullivan's not just a teacher. He's a pillar of the community. People have trusted him with their children for 3 decades. Some of them are going to fight this every step of the way. Let them fight, Sarah said. Eva fought alone. The least we can do is fight for her now. The arrest of Robert Sullivan on November 3, 2024, shattered Asheville like a stone thrown through stained glass. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, spreading through the town with the speed of a wildfire. By noon, satellite trucks from Charlotte, Atlanta, and Nashville lined the streets outside the police station. By evening, the story had gone national. Beloved teacher arrested in 23-year-old cold case. Sarah watched the press conference from the side of the room as Chief of Police Daniel Morton stood at the podium, his face grave, reading a carefully prepared statement. After a thorough investigation utilizing advanced DNA technology and forensic genealogy, we have arrested Robert James Sullivan, age 58, in connection with the disappearance and suspected murder of Eva Martinez in October 2001. Sullivan has been charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. We believe there may be additional victims, and we are urging anyone with information to come forward. The questions from reporters came like gunfire, rapid and overlapping. Was Sullivan a suspect in 2001? How many other victims are there? Did the school know about his behavior? Why did it take 23 years? Chief Morton deflected most of the questions, citing the ongoing investigation, but Sarah could see the strain in his face. This case was going to define his career, define the department, define how this community saw itself. A beloved teacher, trusted with thousands of children over 3 decades, revealed as a predator who'd been hiding in plain sight. The town's reaction split down fault lines invisible until that moment. Half believed immediately, the half that had daughters, that understood how often women's instincts were dismissed, that had heard the whispers over the years about Sullivan being too friendly with certain students but had written it off as gossip. The other half fought the accusation with the fury of people whose worldview was under attack. If Sullivan was guilty, then they'd been wrong. They trusted him, recommended him, sent their children to him for extra help. If Sullivan was guilty, then they'd failed to protect their own kids. The Riverside High School Parents Association called an emergency meeting 2 days after the arrest. Sarah attended, sitting in the back of the auditorium, watching as 200 parents packed into seats designed for student assemblies. The air was thick with tension, voices raised even before the meeting officially began. Catherine Morehouse, the PTA president and mother of 3 Sullivan alumni, stood at the podium, her face flushed. "We need to be very careful about rushing to judgment," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Robert Sullivan has been an exemplary educator for over 30 years. My daughter had him for AP Calculus in 2012, and he was nothing but professional and supportive. This DNA evidence, we don't know the full story. We don't know if it's been contaminated or misinterpreted. My daughter also had Sullivan." A woman in the third row interrupted, standing up. Sarah recognized her, Amanda Breslin, whose daughter had graduated in 2018. "And she told me he made her uncomfortable. She said he asked her to stay after class too often, that he made comments about her appearance, that she felt watched. I told her she was being dramatic. I told her Mr. Sullivan was just being helpful." Amanda's voice cracked. "What if I was wrong? What if my daughter was trying to tell me something, and I didn't listen?" The auditorium erupted into competing voices, some defending Sullivan, others sharing similar stories about daughters who'd felt uncomfortable, sons who'd noticed Sullivan's preferential treatment of female students, unease that had been dismissed as misunderstanding or teenage paranoia. Principal James Hayes, the same principal who'd been at Riverside in 2001, now in his final year before retirement, stood and raised his hands for silence. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent 4 decades managing adolescent chaos. "I understand everyone's concerns," he said, But we need to remember that in America, people are innocent until proven guilty. Mr. Sullivan has not been convicted of anything. The school board is cooperating fully with the investigation, but until there's a verdict, we should not assume. Eva Martinez wrote in her journal that she was afraid of him. The shout came from the back, from Maria Martinez, who'd entered quietly and now stood trembling with rage and grief. Sarah moved quickly toward her, but Maria waved her off. My daughter tried to tell. Wife Margaret, who'd been married to him for 35 years, and their daughter Claire, the medical resident. Both were in shock, unable or unwilling to reconcile the man they knew with the charges against him. Someone. She wrote that she was going to report him the day she disappeared. Why didn't anyone listen? Why didn't anyone protect her? The auditorium fell silent. Maria rarely attended community events, her English still accented after 40 years in America, her presence usually quiet and peripheral. But now she commanded the room's attention. This small woman whose daughter had been stolen from her, whose grief had aged her beyond her 63 years. You all loved Mr. Sullivan, Maria continued, her voice shaking but clear. You all trusted him. But my Eva was afraid. She tried to tell me and I didn't understand. I thought she was stressed about college. I thought I was protecting her by telling her not to worry, that Mr. Sullivan was a good man. Tears streamed down her face. I was wrong. And she died because no one believed a 17-year-old girl when she said something was wrong. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of Maria weeping and the shuffle of uncomfortable feet. Sarah guided Maria to a seat, sitting beside her, holding her hand while the meeting dissolved into smaller arguments, clusters of parents debating in urgent whispers. Over the following days, more stories emerged. A woman named Linda Foster, who'd been a student of Sullivan's in 1995, called the police tip line. I was 16, she told Sarah during an interview at the station. He offered to drive me home when it was raining. I said yes because I trusted him. But instead of taking me home, he drove to a parking lot near the river. He said we needed to talk about my future, about my potential. He put his hand on my knee, pushed him away and ran. I was so scared, but I never told anyone because I thought, who would believe me? He was Mr. Sullivan. I was just a stupid kid. Sarah documented Linda's statement carefully, adding it to the growing file of complaints. 3 more women came forward within the week, all former students, all describing similar patterns. Sullivan's special attention, his isolation of vulnerable girls, his tendency to test boundaries, backing off when met with resistance but always circling back, always watching for the next opportunity. The school board launched an internal investigation, hiring an outside firm to review Sullivan's personnel file and interview past students. What they found was devastating, not because there was a record of misconduct, but because there wasn't. Sullivan had been a master of staying just within the boundaries of acceptable behavior, never quite crossing the line in ways that would trigger formal complaints, always maintaining plausible deniability. The one-on-one tutoring sessions, the extra help, the mentorship, all of it could be defended as a dedicated teacher going above and beyond for his students. But the patterns were there for anyone who knew how to look. Sullivan had consistently requested female students for independent study projects. He'd volunteered to chaperone trips but always found reasons to separate individual girls from groups. He'd written glowing recommendation letters for dozens of students, creating bonds of gratitude and obligation. Several female teachers, when pressed, admitted they'd felt uncomfortable with Sullivan's behavior over the years, but had never formally reported it because they had no concrete evidence, just a feeling that something was off. Sarah interviewed Sullivan's family. He's a good father, Claire said, sitting in her childhood living room, surrounded by photographs of family vacations and school events. He coached my soccer team. He helped me with my homework. He never... She paused, her face crumpling. There must be a mistake. Dad wouldn't hurt anyone. Margaret was more guarded, her expression blank, as if all emotion had been stripped away. I don't know what to believe, she admitted. Part of me wants to defend him absolutely. But then I think about those girls, about their families, and I wonder if I've been blind. How could I live with someone for 35 years and not know? The preliminary hearing arrived 3 weeks after the arrest, and the courthouse was surrounded by media and protesters. One group held signs reading "Justice for Eva" and "Believe Survivors." Another group held signs reading "Innocent until proven guilty" and "Stand with Sullivan." The town had fractured, and the divisions ran through families, workplaces, friendships. Sarah testified about the evidence: the DNA match, the storage unit filled with photographs and journals, Eva's own words describing her fear. The defense attorney, a prominent criminal lawyer named Richard Blackwell who'd driven up from Charlotte, attacked every piece of evidence. The DNA could have been transferred innocently. The storage unit contained nothing illegal, just photographs of students, the kind any teacher might keep. Eva's journal entries were the anxious imaginings of a stressed teenager, not evidence of a crime. "Detective Chen," Blackwell said during cross-examination, his voice smooth and practiced, "isn't it true that you have no physical evidence directly linking Mr. Sullivan to Eva Martinez's disappearance? No witnesses who saw them together that day. No forensic evidence from the scene of her disappearance. We have Mr. Sullivan's DNA on photographs found in a hidden box, along with Eva's personal belongings," Sarah responded. "We have Eva's journal describing his stalking behavior. We have testimony from other women describing similar patterns of grooming and harassment. But no direct evidence of murder, correct? No body has been recovered. No murder weapon has been found. You're asking this court to believe that a respected educator, a man with no criminal record, suddenly became a killer based on circumstantial evidence and accusations from decades ago." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Helen Whitmore, listened carefully to both sides before ruling that there was sufficient probable cause to hold Sullivan for trial. He was denied bail, deemed a flight risk given the severity of the charges. As he was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked directly at Sarah, his expression unreadable. Neither defiant nor afraid, just flat and empty, as if a mask had finally been removed to reveal nothing underneath. The weeks leading up to the trial were chaos. The media descended on Asheville like locusts, interviewing anyone connected to the case. Students from Sullivan's 30-year career were tracked down and questioned. Some defended him passionately, describing him as the teacher who'd changed their lives, who'd believed in them when no one else did. Others, particularly women, spoke more hesitantly, describing uncomfortable moments they dismissed at the time but now remembered differently. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Gonzalez who'd made her career prosecuting violent crimes, built her case methodically. She brought in expert witnesses on grooming behavior, on how predators cultivate trust within communities, on the patterns of serial offenders who hide in positions of authority. She presented the evidence from the storage unit, not just the items connected to Eva, but evidence of Sullivan's obsession with at least 6 other female students over the years. One of those students, now a 42-year-old attorney living in Boston, agreed to testify. Her name was Rebecca Walsh, and she'd been in Sullivan's calculus class in 1992. "He isolated me," she told the court, her voice steady despite visible trembling. "He made me feel special, chosen. He convinced me that our connection was unique, that no one else would understand. When he started making advances, I was confused because I trusted him. When I finally rejected him, he turned cold. My grades suddenly dropped. His recommendation letter was lukewarm. I realized later that he'd been punishing me for not reciprocating his attention." The defense continued to hammer on the lack of physical evidence directly linking Sullivan to Eva's death. Blackwell brought in character witnesses, former colleagues, parents of students, community members who spoke glowingly of Sullivan's dedication and integrity. A retired teacher named Dorothy Park testified that she'd worked alongside Sullivan for 25 years and never saw anything inappropriate. "He was patient with students, especially those who struggled," she said. "If that's a crime, then every good teacher in America is guilty." But the prosecution had Maria Martinez, and her testimony was devastating. She took the stand on a gray December morning, wearing the same black dress she'd worn to her daughter's memorial service 23 years earlier. Patricia Gonzalez guided her gently through her story, Eva's dreams, her work ethic, the changes in her behavior in those final weeks. "My daughter stopped sleeping," Maria said, her accent thickening with emotion. She would sit up at night looking out the window. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she felt like someone was watching the house. I told her she was imagining things. I told her to focus on her studies. Maria's voice broke. I should have listened. I should have believed her. But I thought Mr. Sullivan was a teacher. Teachers are safe. I trusted the wrong person, and my daughter paid for my mistake. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people weeping. Jurors, spectators, even the bailiff looked away, blinking hard. Sarah, sitting in the gallery, watched Sullivan's face for any reaction. But he remained impassive, as if Maria's grief was happening to someone else, in some other room, some other universe. The trial stretched through December and into January 2025. Each day brought new revelations, new witnesses, new pieces of a puzzle that had taken 23 years to assemble. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence, explaining the science in terms the jury could understand. Digital forensic specialists discussed the metadata on the photographs found in Sullivan's storage unit, proving they'd been taken years before Eva's disappearance and stored systematically, organized by year and student. The prosecution introduced evidence of Sullivan's movements on October 22, 2001. Cell tower records, primitive by modern standards but still useful, placed his phone near Riverside High during the window of Eva's disappearance. Gas station security footage showed his car heading toward the mountains later that evening. A clerk at a hardware store in a small town 40 miles away remembered selling him a shovel and tarp around 8 p.m. that night. I remembered because it was odd. The clerk, now retired, testified. It was getting dark, and he seemed nervous, kept looking around like he was worried someone would see him. The defense argued that all of this was circumstantial, that Sullivan could have been running errands, that his presence near the school was normal since he worked there, that the hardware purchase could have been for innocent yard work. Blackwell painted a picture of a devoted teacher being railroaded by a rush to judgment, by a community's need for closure in a cold case, by investigators who'd built a theory and then cherry-picked evidence to support it. But the turning point came when the prosecution introduced evidence found during a second search of Sullivan's property. Investigators had brought in ground-penetrating radar to examine his backyard, and they'd found a disturbed area near the back fence line. Excavation had revealed a metal box buried 3 feet down, containing Eva's missing wallet, her keys, her silver cross necklace, and her MIT acceptance letter, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. The courtroom erupted when the items were presented as evidence. Maria Martinez collapsed in her seat, keening a sound of grief so profound it seemed to hollow out the air itself. Sarah moved quickly to her side, holding her while she wept, whispering reassurances that rang hollow even as she spoke them. We found her things. We found proof. But we haven't found Eva. Sullivan's composure finally cracked. For just a moment, watching the items being cataloged into evidence, his face showed something. Not remorse, but frustration. The annoyance of someone whose carefully maintained system had failed. Then the mask returned, and he was once again the mild-mannered teacher, falsely accused, bearing his persecution with dignity. The defense claimed the items had been planted, that the police had manufactured evidence to secure a conviction. But the forensic timeline didn't support that theory. The box had been buried for years, the metal corroded from long exposure to moisture, the contents aged in ways that couldn't be faked. Sullivan's fingerprints were on the wallet, on the plastic sleeve that protected the MIT letter. The trial concluded on January 15, 2025. Both sides gave their closing arguments in a courtroom packed with spectators, media, and ghosts. Patricia Gonzalez spoke directly to the jury, her voice strong and clear. Eva Martinez was 17 years old when she disappeared. She was brilliant, hardworking, kind. She had a future stretching ahead of her. College, career, family, all the moments that make up a life. Robert Sullivan took that from her. Not in a moment of passion, not in a sudden act of violence, but methodically. He stalked her. He groomed her. He ignored every signal that she was uncomfortable, every boundary she tried to set. And when she decided to report him, to speak up and protect herself, he silenced her permanently. Gonzalez held up the MIT acceptance letter, preserved in its evidence bag. He kept this. Why? Because he wanted to remember what he'd taken from her. He wanted to hold on to the proof of his power, his ability to destroy someone's future and get away with it. For 23 years, he lived a normal life. He taught other students. He went home to his family. He received awards and recognition. And the whole time, Eva's belongings were buried in his backyard, a secret trophy of his perfect crime. She turned to look at Sullivan directly. But it wasn't perfect. Eva left us her words. She told us who she was afraid of. She told us who was watching her, following her, threatening her. And now, finally, we're listening. Blackwell's closing was equally passionate, arguing that the state had failed to meet its burden of proof, that the evidence was circumstantial, that reasonable doubt existed in every aspect of the case. My client is not on trial for being a dedicated teacher, he said. He's not on trial for caring about his students. He's on trial for murder, and the state has not proven that a murder occurred, much less that Robert Sullivan committed it. Eva Martinez's disappearance is a tragedy, but convicting an innocent man won't bring her back. It will only compound the tragedy. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Sarah spent those days at the station, unable to focus on other work, checking her phone constantly for updates. Maria Martinez waited at home, surrounded by friends from her church, praying in Spanish and English, asking God for justice that seemed impossible to guarantee. On January 18, 2025, at 3:47 p.m., the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded with noise, gasps, sobs, shouts of relief and anger. Sullivan remained motionless, staring straight ahead, as Judge Whitmore read the verdict aloud. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of evidence tampering. Each word fell like a hammer blow, sealing away what remained of the life Robert Sullivan had built on lies and careful performances. Sarah found Maria in the hallway after, surrounded by supporters, her face wet with tears but radiant with something that looked like peace. "She can rest now," Maria whispered, clutching Sarah's hands. "My Eva can finally rest." But Sarah knew the truth was more complicated. The verdict brought closure to some questions while opening others. Where was Eva's body? What had happened in those final moments? Were there other victims who'd never been identified? Girls who'd disappeared without leaving enough evidence behind? The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the interim, the community began the slow process of reckoning with what had happened. Riverside High School hired counselors to help students and staff process the revelation that a beloved teacher had been a predator. The school board launched a comprehensive review of their policies on reporting and investigating misconduct. Parents demanded changes, better training for recognizing grooming behavior, stronger protocols for one-on-one interactions between teachers and students, systems that would make it easier for students to report uncomfortable situations without fear of not being believed. But alongside the push for change came the backlash. Sullivan's supporters, and he still had them, argued that the trial had been unfair, that he'd been convicted by media pressure rather than solid evidence. They started a legal defense fund, circulated petitions for appeal, created social media groups dedicated to proving his innocence. Some of them harassed Maria Martinez, leaving cruel messages on her phone, spray painting "liar" on her garage door. Sarah had to assign protective detail to Maria's house, officers who sat in their cars outside, making sure the woman who'd suffered most from Sullivan's crimes didn't become a victim of his defenders too. The divisions in Asheville ran deep and bitter. Friendships ended. Families stopped speaking. The town's identity, once defined by its artistic culture, its mountain beauty, its tight-knit community feeling, became defined by this trial, by the arguments over who to believe, by the impossible question of how to reconcile 30 years of trust with the reality of systematic predation. Sarah attended the sentencing hearing on February 8, 2025. Judge Whitmore allowed victim impact statements, and the courtroom filled with women, Sullivan's former students, now adults, who'd carried the weight of his attention for years. Some spoke of narrowly escaping worse fates. Others spoke of the ways his grooming had damaged their ability to trust, to feel safe, to recognize appropriate boundaries. Rebecca Walsh, the attorney from Boston, spoke with the clarity of someone who'd spent years in therapy unpacking the damage. "I was 16 when Mr. Sullivan made me believe his attention was special," she said. "It took me 20 years to understand that what he did was assault. Not physical, but psychological. He made me doubt my own instincts. He made me feel responsible for his inappropriate behavior. He taught me that my discomfort didn't matter, that I should be grateful for his attention even when it made my skin crawl. That lesson affected every relationship I had for decades. I'm 42 years old, and I'm still learning how to trust my own voice." Maria Martinez spoke last, her statement brief but shattering. "My daughter had a voice," she said. "She tried to use it. She tried to tell us she was in danger. We didn't listen. I didn't listen. I live with that every day. But I want everyone here to know Eva was right. Her instincts were right. Her fear was right. And if we'd listened to her instead of trusting a man whose kindness was a disguise, she might still be alive." Judge Whitmore sentenced Robert Sullivan to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, he finally spoke, turning to address the courtroom with the same calm, patient voice he'd used for 3 decades of teaching. "I'm innocent," he said. "History will prove it. I dedicated my life to helping students, and this is how I'm repaid, with lies and persecution. But the truth always comes out eventually." Sarah felt sick watching him, seeing the absolute conviction in his face. He genuinely believed himself the victim. Even now, even with all the evidence, all the testimony, all the proof of his systematic predation, he saw himself as a good man wrongly accused. That, more than anything, revealed what he truly was. The weeks following Sullivan's sentencing brought a flood of revelations that no one had anticipated. The FBI got involved, recognizing patterns in Sullivan's behavior that suggested his predation might extend beyond Asheville, beyond the 6 victims they'd already identified. Special Agent Linda Torres, who specialized in serial predators, set up a task force office in a conference room at the Asheville Police Department, covering the walls with photographs, timelines, maps marking Sullivan's movements over 30 years. Predators like Sullivan don't suddenly start at age 26. Torres explained to Sarah and Marcus during a briefing in late February. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the air of someone who'd seen humanity's worst and refused to be broken by it. He taught for 32 years, but before that, he was a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill, then a student teacher in Wilmington. We need to look at those years too. The investigation expanded, reaching backward into Sullivan's past like archaeologists excavating layers of buried history. They found his college yearbooks, his graduate school records, his previous addresses. They interviewed professors who remembered him as quiet, diligent, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of student who blended into the background, never causing problems, never attracting attention. But when they dug deeper, cracks appeared in the facade. A police report from 1991 in Wilmington, a complaint from a 16-year-old girl who said her student teacher had made her uncomfortable, asking personal questions, showing up at her after-school job. The report had gone nowhere. The girl's parents had been told she was probably misinterpreting normal mentorship. Sullivan had been reassigned to a different school, and the incident had been forgotten. "This is the pattern," Torres said, pointing to the report. "He tests boundaries. When someone pushes back, he retreats, waits, finds a new target. He's been doing this his entire adult life, and every time someone tried to report him, the system protected him because he seemed like such a nice guy." They found more reports, more complaints, scattered across 3 decades and 3 cities. None of them had resulted in formal charges. Most hadn't even resulted in disciplinary action. Sullivan had been a master of staying just within the boundaries of plausible deniability, never quite crossing the line in ways that would trigger serious consequences. Until Eva. Eva had been different, more determined, more willing to formally report him, less willing to be silenced by his reputation or her own doubts. And so she'd had to be silenced permanently. The task force reached out to women across the country, asking anyone who'd been Sullivan's student to come forward if they'd experienced inappropriate behavior. The response was overwhelming. Over 40 women contacted the tip line, some with stories of narrow escapes, others with tales of psychological manipulation that had taken years of therapy to overcome. One woman, Jennifer Cabot, had been in Sullivan's very first class at Riverside High in 1992. She called from Seattle, where she now worked as a software engineer, her voice shaking as she described her experience. "I was 15, she told Sarah during a phone interview. "My parents were getting divorced, and I was struggling. Mr. Sullivan offered to help, tutoring after school, someone to talk to. I was grateful, but then he started asking about my body, my relationships, my sexual experiences. When I told him I was uncomfortable, he said I was being immature, that mature girls could handle adult conversations." Jennifer had stopped attending the tutoring sessions, but Sullivan had continued to watch her, to make comments in class that felt pointed and personal. "I felt hunted," she said, "like I was being circled by something patient and hungry, but I never reported it because I thought no one would believe me. And I was right. When I mentioned it to my mom, she told me I should be grateful a teacher was willing to give me extra attention during such a difficult time." The pattern repeated across dozens of testimonies. Vulnerable girls, dealing with family problems, financial stress, social isolation, identified and cultivated by a predator who understood that the most effective camouflage was the appearance of kindness. Sullivan had been meticulous, targeting girls who were less likely to be believed, who were already doubting themselves, who desperately needed the validation and support he pretended to offer. The FBI discovered something else during their investigation. Sullivan had been keeping detailed records. In a safety deposit box registered under a false name, they found notebooks filled with his handwriting, documenting his interactions with dozens of girls over 30 years. The entries read like a hunter's journal, clinical and disturbing, tracking each girl's vulnerabilities, her responses to his attention, the points at which she might become suspicious or resistant. There was an entry about Eva. "AM is proving more difficult than anticipated. High degree of self-awareness. Strong maternal bond creates external accountability. College ambitions provide motivation to resist disruption. Must adjust approach. Consider isolation tactics. Remove support systems. Create dependency." Reading those words, Sarah felt rage so pure it was almost incapacitating. Sullivan hadn't seen Eva as a human being. He'd seen her as a problem to be solved, a resistance to be worn down, a target that required more sophisticated hunting strategies. The notebooks revealed something even more disturbing, coded references to other girls whose identities the FBI was still trying to determine. Sullivan had used initials, physical descriptions, locations. Some entries ended with the notation resolved, others with abandoned, and a few with collected. The task force believed collected meant he'd kept something belonging to the girl, the way he'd kept Eva's belongings, the way he'd preserved items from at least 6 other identified victims. They organized a press conference to appeal for more information, to ask anyone who recognized themselves in Sullivan's descriptions to come forward. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Women who'd thought they were alone in their experiences discovered they were part of a pattern. Parents who dismissed their daughters' complaints realized they'd failed to protect them from a predator who'd hidden behind the armor of respectability. One of the most shocking revelations came from Sullivan's own family. His daughter Claire, after weeks of soul-searching and therapy, reached out to Sarah with information that shattered what remained of her father's carefully constructed persona. They met at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, away from the media circus that still surrounded anything connected to the case. Claire looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around a mug of tea she didn't drink. "I found something," she said quietly, "in my childhood home in the attic. My mother asked me to help her pack up Dad's things. She's selling the house, can't afford to stay there anymore. We found a box hidden behind the insulation. More photographs, more journals, and..." She paused, her face crumpling. "And pictures of me, of my friends, from when we were teenagers. The way he photographed us, it wasn't fatherly. It was the same way he photographed his victims." Sarah's stomach turned. Claire, I'm so sorry. Did he ever? No. He never touched me. But I think he wanted to. I remember being 14, 15, and feeling uncomfortable when he looked at me. I remember him commenting on my body, on my clothes, on my friends' appearances. I thought it was just awkward dad behavior. But now, she looked up, tears streaming down her face. I brought my friends around him. I trusted him. What if he hurt someone I knew? What if my presence in the house was the only thing that kept him from doing to them what he did to Eva? The weight of that realization, that Sullivan's own daughter had been both protected and endangered by her proximity to him, was almost unbearable. Sarah documented Claire's statement carefully, adding the new evidence to the ever-growing file. The photographs Claire had found led to more identifications. 3 of the girls pictured were Claire's high school friends, and when contacted, 2 of them admitted that Sullivan had made them uncomfortable during sleepovers at the house, coming into rooms where they were sleeping, making comments that felt inappropriate, offering to drive them home and taking routes that seemed unnecessarily isolated. We were kids. One of them, now a 32-year-old accountant named Melissa Grant, told Sarah. We didn't have language for what felt wrong. We just knew we didn't want to be alone with him. We made excuses not to sleep over at Claire's house anymore. But we never told her why because we didn't want to upset her. The revelations kept coming, each one peeling back another layer of Sullivan's deception. His wife Margaret, after weeks of silence, filed for divorce and released a statement through her attorney. I believed I knew my husband. I was wrong. I am horrified by what he has done, by the pain he has caused, by the lives he has destroyed. I can never atone for my failure to see what he was, but I can ensure that his victims know I believe them, I support them, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry. The school district hired an independent firm to conduct a comprehensive review of how Sullivan had operated undetected for so long. The resulting report, released in March 2025, was damning. It revealed a culture of dismissing female students' complaints, of prioritizing teachers' reputations over student safety, of treating young women's instincts and fears as hysteria rather than legitimate concerns. Principal Hayes, facing intense pressure and acknowledging his own failures, announced his immediate retirement. In his statement, he admitted that Eva Martinez had attempted to report Sullivan's behavior to him on October 22, 2001, the day she disappeared. Eva came to my office during lunch, Hayes wrote. She told me she was uncomfortable with Mr. Sullivan's attention, that she wanted to be transferred out of his class. I told her that Mr. Sullivan was an excellent teacher who had her best interests at heart, that she should focus on her studies rather than creating drama that could jeopardize her college prospects. I sent her away. By the end of that day, she was gone. I have lived with that decision for 23 years, but I never spoke about it publicly because I was ashamed. I failed Eva Martinez. I failed all the girls who tried to tell us they were in danger. Hayes's admission triggered a wave of accountability. Other staff members who'd dismissed complaints or looked the other way came forward, adding their own confessions to the growing record of institutional failure. The vice principal who'd told a girl in 1998 that she should feel flattered by Sullivan's attention. The guidance counselor who'd suggested a student in 2007 was overreacting to Sullivan's request for her to come to his classroom alone after school. The department head who'd heard rumors about Sullivan's inappropriate relationships but never investigated because Sullivan was too valuable to the school's academic reputation. The community held a town hall meeting in mid-March to discuss what had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Over 500 people packed into the Asheville Civic Center, and the conversation was raw, painful, necessary. Survivors spoke about the long-term impact of Sullivan's grooming, about the ways his manipulation had shaped their relationships, their careers, their ability to trust. Parents spoke about their guilt for not believing their daughters, for prioritizing a teacher's reputation over their own children's safety. Maria Martinez attended, sitting in the front row, her presence a quiet reminder of what was lost when adults failed to listen. When the moderator asked if she wanted to speak, she stood slowly, her small frame seeming to fill the entire space. "My daughter tried to save herself," Maria said, her voice steady. She kept a journal. She wrote down everything that was happening. She tried to report it. She did everything right, and it wasn't enough. Because all of us, we chose to believe that a man with a good reputation couldn't also be dangerous. We chose to believe that our comfort, our desire to think well of our community, was more important than a young woman's fear. She paused, looking around the room. Eva is gone. I cannot bring her back. But there are other girls, other young women, who are right now feeling afraid of someone they're told they should trust. We can choose differently this time. We can choose to believe them. We can choose to investigate even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means admitting we were wrong about someone we respected. We can choose to protect our children instead of protecting our own feelings. The room erupted in applause, people standing, weeping, acknowledging both the failure and the possibility of doing better. It was a moment of collective reckoning, painful and cathartic and insufficient, because no amount of acknowledgement could bring Eva back, could restore what had been taken from her. In April, the FBI announced they had identified 2 more potential victims from Sullivan's coded journals, women who had disappeared in the late 1990s from towns where Sullivan had attended teaching conferences. One case in Raleigh, another in Charleston. Both girls had been 17. Both had been described by friends and family as anxious in the weeks before their disappearances. Both had mentioned a teacher or mentor figure who was paying them special attention. The families of those missing girls, Anna Chen and Brittany Foster, came to Asheville to meet with the task force, to see the evidence, to finally have confirmation that their daughter's fears had been justified. Sarah sat with them in the conference room, watching them process the horrifying relief of finally knowing who had taken their children, even as they grappled with the likelihood that they would never know exactly what had happened, would never be able to give their daughters proper burials. At least we know she wasn't crazy, Anna Chen's mother said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Sullivan's journal entries about her daughter. Anna told us she felt watched. She said her mentor was making her uncomfortable. We told her she was being paranoid. We sent her to a therapist for anxiety. And all along she was right. She knew she was being hunted, and we didn't believe her. The weight of collective failure pressed down on everyone involved in the case. Sarah found herself working 16-hour days, driven by a need to find answers for families who'd been searching for decades, to honor Eva and all the other girls who'd tried to speak up and been silenced. In May, the task force announced a breakthrough. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they'd searched properties Sullivan had access to over the years, including a family cabin in the mountains that had been sold 15 years ago but was available for searching with the current owner's permission. In the woods behind the cabin, they found burial sites. 3 of them. The remains were sent to the state medical examiner for identification. DNA testing confirmed what everyone had feared but needed to know. Eva Martinez, Anna Chen, and Brittany Foster all found together, all buried with care that suggested Sullivan had visited them regularly, maintaining the sites as if they were shrines to his power rather than graves of his victims. When Sarah called Maria Martinez to tell her they'd found Eva, the sound that came through the phone was something beyond grief. A keening that seemed to come from the center of the earth, from the place where mothers hold their children's souls even after death separates them. "Can I see her?" Maria asked when she could speak again. "Can I bring her home?" "Yes," Sarah said, her own voice breaking. "We'll bring her home to you." The funerals were held in June, 3 separate services that brought together families, communities, and hundreds of survivors whose lives had been touched by Sullivan's predation. Eva's service filled the Cathedral of All Souls, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, creating rainbows that danced across the mourners' faces. Maria had chosen to bury Eva in the same cemetery as her father, reuniting a family torn apart by tragedy. The gravestone read, Eva Martinez, 1984 to 2001. Beloved daughter, brilliant mind, brave heart. She tried to tell us. We should have listened. Sarah stood at the graveside as Eva was finally laid to rest, watching Maria place a photograph of the Golden Gate Bridge on the casket. One of the bridges Eva had dreamed of building, a symbol of the connections she'd wanted to create, the possibilities she'd been denied. The months following the discovery of the burial sites brought a period of painful transformation for Asheville and the broader community affected by Robert Sullivan's crimes. The town that had fractured over his arrest began slowly to heal, not through forgetting but through facing the full scope of what had happened and committing to meaningful change. In July 2025, the North Carolina state legislature passed what became known as Eva's Law, a comprehensive reform of how schools handle reports of inappropriate conduct between teachers and students. The law mandated specific training for all school staff on recognizing grooming behaviors, created protected channels for students to report concerns anonymously, and established severe penalties for administrators who failed to properly investigate complaints. It also required background checks that included interviews with previous employers about any complaints or concerning behavior, closing the loophole that had allowed Sullivan to move between schools without his problematic history following him. Maria Martinez attended the bill signing ceremony in Raleigh, standing beside Governor Eva Chen, as she signed Eva's Law into effect. The press photographed Maria's face as she watched the governor's pen move across the page. Not triumph, but a kind of fierce satisfaction. The knowledge that her daughter's death would protect other daughters, other bright girls with dreams of building bridges. "This doesn't bring Eva back," Maria said during the press conference afterward. "Nothing can do that. But maybe it means the next girl who feels afraid, who tries to speak up, will be heard. Maybe it means the next Eva will be believed instead of silenced." The law's impact rippled outward. Other states began drafting similar legislation. School districts across the country reviewed their policies, implemented new training programs, created oversight committees that included student representatives. The conversation about how institutions protected predators at the expense of victims finally moved from feminist academic circles into mainstream policy discussions. Riverside High School underwent its own transformation. The new principal, Dr. Michelle Washington, a former middle school administrator with a doctorate in educational psychology and a reputation for putting student welfare above all else, implemented sweeping changes. Sullivan's classroom was converted into a resource center for students, a safe space staffed by trained counselors where students could report concerns, access mental health support, and learn about healthy boundaries and consent. The school commissioned a memorial for Eva and the other victims, a sculpture in the courtyard featuring 3 bridges reaching toward each other, representing the connections Eva had dreamed of building. The plaque read, "In memory of Eva Martinez, Anna Chen, and Brittany Foster, and all those whose voices were not heard. May we listen better. May we protect better. May we never forget the cost of our failures." Dr. Washington also created a scholarship fund in Eva's name for first-generation college students pursuing STEM degrees. The fund was supported by donations from Sullivan's former students, particularly those who'd escaped his predation and felt survivor's guilt for having lived while others died. They poured money into the scholarship, as if they could retroactively save Eva by ensuring other girls like her had pathways to their dreams. The first recipient of the Eva Martinez Memorial Scholarship was a senior named Sofia Rodriguez, the daughter of textile workers, who'd been accepted to MIT's engineering program with a full ride supplemented by the Memorial Fund. At the award ceremony in September 2025, Sofia spoke about what the scholarship meant to her. "I never knew Eva Martinez," Sofia said, standing at the podium in the school auditorium where Eva had once received her own MIT acceptance. "But I feel like I know her through her journal entries, through the stories people tell about her kindness and her dreams. She wanted to build bridges, literal ones, but also metaphorical ones between different worlds, different possibilities. Because of what happened to her, because people finally listened to what she tried to tell us, I get to build those bridges. I get to live the future she was stolen from. And I promise her and all of you, that I will make it matter. I will build bridges strong enough to carry every girl who comes after me." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Maria Martinez, sitting in the front row, wept openly, holding the hands of women on either side of her. Anna Chen's mother and Brittany Foster's mother, 3 women bound together by grief but also by determination to ensure their daughters' deaths created lasting change. The criminal justice system continued its work. Sullivan's appeals were denied at every level. He remained in central prison in Raleigh, housed in protective custody because even in a population of violent offenders, predators who targeted children were considered the lowest form of life. He gave occasional interviews from prison, always maintaining his innocence, always positioning himself as a victim of hysteria and false accusations. But his voice grew quieter over time, drowned out by the chorus of survivors who refused to be silenced anymore. Detective Sarah Chen found herself in an unexpected role, training law enforcement across the country on investigating cold cases involving predators in positions of trust. She traveled to conferences, taught workshops, helped other departments recognize patterns they'd missed. The Eva Martinez case became a textbook example of how DNA technology, genealogy research, and victim-centered investigation could solve cases that had seemed impossible. But Sarah's most important work happened locally, in Asheville, where she partnered with the school district and community organizations to create a prevention program. The program brought law enforcement, teachers, parents, and most importantly, students together for regular dialogues about safety, boundaries, and the importance of trusting instincts. They called it the Eva Martinez Safety Initiative, and it became a model replicated in communities across North Carolina. One afternoon in October 2025, exactly 24 years after Eva's disappearance, Sarah visited Maria Martinez at her home on Maple Street. The house looked different now. The garage door had been repainted, covering the hateful graffiti that had briefly marred it. The yard was full of flowers, tended by volunteers from Maria's church who'd formed a support system around her in the years since Eva's remains were found. They sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, surrounded by photographs of Eva at every age. Maria had added new pictures to the collection, images of the memorial sculpture, articles about Eva's law, photographs of Sofia Rodriguez receiving her scholarship. Eva's story had grown beyond a single tragedy into something larger, something that connected thousands of people working to create a safer world. "Do you think she knows?" Maria asked softly, looking at a photograph of Eva at 17, smiling, holding a calculus textbook. "Do you think she knows that people finally listened?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She wasn't religious in the way Maria was, didn't have the same certainty about afterlife or souls watching from heaven. But she thought about energy, about how actions rippled forward through time, about how Eva's courage in trying to report Sullivan had ultimately led to his capture, even though she hadn't lived to see it. "I think she does," Sarah said finally, "because her words are still speaking. Her journal, that careful documentation she kept, that's what broke the case open. She left us a map to follow, evidence that outlasted his attempts to silence her. In that way, she's still protecting people. She's still building bridges." Maria nodded, tears sliding down her face, but she was smiling. She would like that. She always wanted to matter, to make a difference. Not for fame or recognition, but because she believed. Maria's voice caught. She believed that if you had the power to help people, you had the responsibility to use it. The conversation turned to practical matters. Maria's health, her financial situation, her plans for the future. The settlement from the school district had helped, as had donations from the community. Maria was 64 now, thinking about retirement, about maybe moving closer to her sister in California. But she wanted to stay in Asheville through November, through the trial of the administrators who'd failed to act on complaints against Sullivan. She wanted to be there, present, a living reminder of what their negligence had cost. The trial of Principal Hayes and 2 other administrators began in November 2025. They weren't charged with Eva's murder. Sullivan alone bore that responsibility, but with criminal negligence and failure to report suspected child abuse. The trial was shorter than Sullivan's, the evidence more straightforward. Hayes's own admission that he'd dismissed Eva's complaint the day she disappeared was damning. The testimony of dozens of students and parents about complaints that went nowhere, about a culture that protected teachers at students' expense, painted a picture of systematic failure. The jury convicted all 3 administrators. Their sentences were lighter than Sullivan's, 3 to 5 years with possibilities for parole, but the convictions themselves sent a message that reverberated through educational institutions nationwide. Administrators had a legal duty to protect students, and failing that duty had consequences. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Whitmore addressed the courtroom with words that would be quoted in training sessions and policy discussions for years to come. "These defendants did not kill Eva Martinez," she said, "but their failures created the conditions that allowed a predator to operate unchecked for decades. Their choice to prioritize institutional reputation over student safety cost at least 3 young women their lives and damaged countless others. This court hopes these convictions serve as a clear message. Protecting children must always, always, come before protecting adults in positions of power. The ripple effects of the case continued to spread. The school board of Asheville City Schools was entirely replaced in a special election, with candidates running on platforms of transparency and student-centered policies. The new board hired additional counselors, implemented strict guidelines for teacher-student interactions, and created an independent oversight committee that included students, parents, and community members with no financial ties to the district. Other institutions in Asheville examined their own practices. Youth sports organizations revised their policies on coach-athlete interactions. Churches created new protocols for reporting and investigating misconduct by clergy or volunteers. The YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the community theater, all of them implemented changes designed to prevent predators from using their programs as hunting grounds. In December 2025, the Asheville Police Department held a ceremony honoring those who'd worked on the Eva Martinez case. Sarah Chen received a commendation for exceptional detective work, but she deflected the praise during her brief speech. "This case wasn't solved because of exceptional police work," she said. "It was solved because Eva Martinez was brave enough to document what was happening to her, because her mother never stopped demanding answers, because survivors came forward even when they knew they might not be believed. The real heroes are the women who trusted us with their stories, who relived their trauma to help us build a case. They're the ones who deserve recognition." Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who'd worked alongside Sarah throughout the investigation, announced his retirement at the same ceremony. He was 60 now, ready to spend time with his grandchildren, ready to step away from cases that had accumulated in his mind like stones. But he left with the satisfaction of knowing that the one case that had haunted him since he was a rookie, the disappearance of a bright 17-year-old girl with dreams of building bridges, had finally been solved. The new year, 2026, brought fresh challenges and continued healing. Maria Martinez finally scattered some of Eva's ashes at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, fulfilling her daughter's dream of reaching that iconic structure even if not in the way either of them had imagined. She stood on the bridge with the Pacific wind whipping around her, speaking to Eva in Spanish, telling her about all the changes her courage had created, about the girls who were safer now because of her. Sofia Rodriguez, the scholarship recipient, maintained regular correspondence with Maria, sending updates about her classes at MIT, sharing photographs of the campus Eva had never reached. She wrote about studying structural engineering, about the same dreams Eva had held, about feeling a responsibility to honor Eva's memory by excelling in the field Eva had loved. "Sometimes I sit in class and imagine Eva sitting beside me," Sophia wrote in one letter. "I imagine us working on problem sets together, complaining about the workload, dreaming about the bridges we'll design. I know it sounds strange, but it makes me feel less alone. Like I'm carrying her dreams forward, making sure they didn't die with her." Maria framed that letter and hung it in Eva's bedroom, which she'd finally begun to change from a shrine into something else. A living memorial, yes, but also a space that acknowledged growth and change rather than being frozen in 2001. She added Sophia's MIT acceptance letter beside Eva's, creating a visual representation of dreams passing from one generation to the next. The FBI's task force, led by Special Agent Torres, continued investigating leads on other potential victims. Sullivan's notebooks contained references to over 30 girls across 3 decades, and while they'd identified most of them, many of whom had escaped with psychological scars but their lives intact, there were still several whose identities remained unknown. Torres was determined to find them all, to notify every family, to give closure to everyone Sullivan had touched. In March 2026, they identified another victim, a girl named Melissa Wright who disappeared from Wilmington in 1993 while Sullivan was doing his student teaching there. Her remains were found in a wooded area outside the city, buried with the same care Sullivan had shown with Eva, Anna, and Brittany. Melissa had been 16, had told friends about a student teacher who made her uncomfortable, had disappeared after school one day and never been seen again. Her parents, now in their 70s, had spent 33 years searching. The closure was both a relief and a reopening of ancient wounds. They traveled to Asheville to meet Maria Martinez, and the two families formed a bond built on shared grief and hard-won understanding. They started a support network for families of Sullivan's victims, creating space for people to process their trauma and channel their pain into advocacy. The documentary filmmaker Ken Burns announced he was working on a project about the case, planning a 4-part series that would examine not just Sullivan's crimes, but the broader systemic failures that had allowed him to operate for so long. He interviewed dozens of people connected to the case: survivors, investigators, policymakers, psychologists specializing in predatory behavior. The project aimed to be both a tribute to the victims and a call to action for institutions that continued to prioritize their own reputations over the safety of vulnerable people. Riverside High School's graduation ceremony in May 2026 included a moment of silence for Eva, Anna, and Brittany. Dr. Washington spoke about their memory, about the responsibility each graduating student carried to create a safer, more just world. Sofia Rodriguez, home from MIT for the summer, attended the ceremony and delivered a brief address about the Eva Martinez Memorial Scholarship and what it meant to continue Eva's legacy. Eva Martinez died trying to protect herself, Sofia told the assembled students and families. She did everything right. She documented what was happening. She tried to report it. She trusted her instincts. The system failed her. But because of her courage, because she left us a record of what happened, the system is changing. We're learning to listen better. We're learning to believe victims. We're learning that safety matters more than reputation. Sofia paused, looking at the faces before her. Young people on the cusp of adulthood, heading out into a world that was incrementally safer because of the changes Eva's case had catalyzed. Every one of you has a voice, she continued. Every one of you has instincts that can protect you and others. Don't let anyone convince you to ignore those instincts. Don't let anyone make you feel wrong for being uncomfortable or afraid. The world is still imperfect, still dangerous in ways it shouldn't be. But it's also full of people who are trying to make it better. Be one of those people. Speak up. Listen when others speak up. Believe survivors. Protect each other. The applause was thunderous, sustained, a collective acknowledgement of hard truths and tentative hope. Sarah Chen, sitting in the audience beside Marcus Webb and his family, felt something shift in her chest. Not closure exactly, because cases like this never truly close, but a sense of completion. Eva's voice had been silenced, but it had also been amplified beyond anything Sullivan could have anticipated. Her journal had become evidence. Her courage had become inspiration. Her death had become a catalyst for change that would protect thousands of girls who'd never know how close they'd come to similar fates. In June 2026, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children honored Maria Martinez with their Hope Award, recognizing her decades of advocacy and her role in pushing for systemic change. Maria accepted the award in Washington, D.C., standing on a stage and speaking to an audience of lawmakers, advocates, and families of missing children. When Eva disappeared, I felt powerless, Maria said, her voice amplified through the auditorium. I was a factory worker, an immigrant, a single mother. Who would listen to me? But I learned that power doesn't come from position or wealth or status. It comes from refusing to be silent. It comes from demanding answers even when people want you to accept their comfortable lies. It comes from loving your child so much that you never stop fighting for them, even after they're gone. She held up a photograph of Eva, the same one that had been circulated when she first disappeared, showing a smiling teenager with dark hair and bright eyes full of promise. This is my daughter. This is Eva. She was brilliant and kind and brave. She deserved to live. She deserved to build her bridges, to change the world, to grow old and have her own children. She was stolen from us by a predator who wore the mask of a good man. But even in death, she's still building bridges between policymakers and families, between past failures and future protections, between silence and accountability. Maria's words were quoted in newspapers across the country, shared on social media, incorporated into training materials for educators and law enforcement. Eva Martinez, who'd been a small-town tragedy in 2001, became a national symbol of why victim voices matter, why institutional reform is essential, why the work of protecting children must be ongoing and vigilant. The summer of 2026 brought unexpected news. Claire Sullivan, Robert Sullivan's daughter, had completed a memoir about growing up with a father who turned out to be a monster. The book, titled The Mask, A Daughter's Reckoning, was a brutally honest examination of how predators hide in plain sight, how families miss or dismiss warning signs, how the people closest to monsters can be both protected and endangered by their proximity. Claire donated all proceeds from the book to organizations supporting survivors of sexual violence and to the Eva Martinez Memorial Scholarship Fund. She also began speaking publicly about her experience, helping other family members of predators understand that their loved ones' crimes were not their fault, that they too were victims of deception and manipulation. In August 2026, on what would have been Eva's 42nd birthday, Maria Martinez organized a community gathering at the memorial sculpture at Riverside High. Over 200 people attended: former students, survivors, advocates, officials who'd worked on the case, families of other victims. They shared stories, lit candles, and planted flowers around the sculpture's base. Sofia Rodriguez spoke again. This time about the bridges Eva had dreamed of building becoming real in unexpected ways. Eva wanted to create structures that connected separated things, Sofia said. She wanted to make impossible journeys possible. And look what she's done. She's connected survivors across decades and distances. She's connected policymakers with the people they're supposed to protect. She's connected past tragedies with future prevention. She's building bridges even now, even from beyond death, because her voice refuses to be silent. As the sun set over the mountains surrounding Asheville, the gathered crowd held hands and observed a moment of silence. In that silence, Sarah Chen thought she could feel something, not supernatural but profoundly human, the collective determination of hundreds of people choosing to remember, to learn, to do better. Maria Martinez stood at the center of the memorial sculpture, touching each of the 3 bridges reaching toward each other. She thought about Eva's last journal entry, about her daughter's determination to report what was happening despite her fear, despite knowing she might not be believed. Eva had tried to save herself and hadn't succeeded. But in the trying, in the documenting, in the refusal to be silent, she'd saved others. She'd created change that rippled forward through time, protecting girls she'd never meet, inspiring people she'd never know. "Happy birthday, Mija," Maria whispered, her words carried away by the mountain breeze. "Look at all the bridges you built. Look at all the lives you saved. You made it matter, Eva. Your life, your death, your courage. It all matters. The world is better because you were in it, even for only 17 years. I hope you know that. I hope you rest knowing that." 3 years later, September 2029. Sofia Rodriguez stood at the podium in MIT's Kresge Auditorium, accepting the department's award for Outstanding Undergraduate Thesis in Structural Engineering. Her project, a revolutionary design for earthquake-resistant bridges that could be built in economically disadvantaged areas using locally sourced materials, had attracted attention from engineering firms and humanitarian organizations worldwide. "I dedicate this work to Eva Martinez," Sofia said, her voice steady, "who taught me that engineering isn't just about structures. It's about building pathways for people to reach their dreams. This bridge design is meant for communities like the one Eva and I came from, places where infrastructure can change lives, where a safe crossing can mean the difference between isolation and opportunity." In the audience, Maria Martinez wiped tears from her eyes, sitting beside Claire Sullivan, who'd become an unexpected friend and ally. The 2 women, bound by tragedy from opposite sides, had formed a partnership, traveling together to speak at schools and conferences about recognizing and preventing predatory behavior. Their joint presence was powerful. The mother of a victim and the daughter of a predator, united in their commitment to protecting others. After the ceremony, as Sofia showed Maria and Claire around campus, they walked across the Harvard Bridge connecting Boston to Cambridge. Sofia pointed out engineering features, load distribution, material choices, historical design elements, and Maria smiled, remembering Eva's childhood fascination with bridges, the posters that had covered her bedroom walls. "She would have loved this," Maria said softly. "She would have been right here beside you, probably arguing about the optimal truss configuration." "She is here," Sofia said firmly, Every time I solve a problem, every time I design something meant to help people, I think about her, about what she didn't get to do. It makes me work harder, push further, make sure my work matters. That evening, the three women had dinner in a small Italian restaurant in Cambridge. They talked about the changes that continued to unfold. Eva's law had now been adopted in 42 states, with federal legislation pending. The curriculum Sophia had helped develop, Engineering for Social Justice, was being taught at universities across the country, training the next generation of engineers to think about their work's humanitarian impact. Sullivan's up for a parole hearing next year, Claire mentioned quietly, her face troubled. Even though he was sentenced to life without parole, there's a procedural review required every 5 years. He'll be denied, of course, but it means revisiting everything, releasing statements, possibly media attention again. Maria nodded, her jaw tightening. Let them review. Let him sit in that hearing and be told again that he will die in prison. I want him to experience that rejection over and over, the way Eva experienced his hunting, the way we experienced the loss of her. I'll be there with you, Claire said, reaching across the table to squeeze Maria's hand. We'll all be there. He won't face you alone. 5 years later, October 2034. The Eva Martinez Center for Student Safety opened in Asheville on the 33rd anniversary of Eva's disappearance. The facility, built with funds from settlements, donations, and state grants, served as both a memorial and a practical resource. A place where students could receive counseling, report concerns, and access educational programs about boundaries, consent, and personal safety. Detective Sarah Chen, now Captain Chen and head of the Criminal Investigations Division, gave the keynote address at the opening ceremony. At 49, with silver threading through her dark hair, she'd become a national expert on cold case investigations and institutional accountability. But the Eva Martinez case remained the most important of her career, the one that had taught her how justice could be both achingly slow and ultimately transformative. This center represents a promise, Sarah told the crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting. A promise that when young people speak up about feeling unsafe, we will listen. When they report inappropriate behavior, we will investigate. When they trust us with their fears, we will take them seriously. Eva Martinez tried to access this kind of support in 2001, and it didn't exist. Because of her, because of what we learned from failing her, it exists now. Maria Martinez, now 73 and moving slowly but still fiercely present, cut the ribbon alongside Dr. Washington, who'd remained principal of Riverside High and had been instrumental in creating the center. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs. Not just of Eva, Anna, and Brittany, but of dozens of young people whose lives had been changed by the reforms their deaths had catalyzed. Students who'd felt safe reporting harassment because Eva's law protected them. Girls who'd trusted their instincts because they'd been taught that their discomfort mattered. Young people who'd intervened when they saw concerning behavior because they understood that bystanders had power. Sofia Rodriguez, now a structural engineer working for an international firm specializing in humanitarian infrastructure projects, had designed the center's unique architectural features. The building incorporated 3 bridge motifs in its design, one over the main entrance, another connecting 2 wings of the facility, a third in the courtyard as a covered walkway. Each bridge was inscribed with one of the victims' names and a quote about connection, safety, or hope. Eva's bridge bore her words from her journal. I believe that if you have the power to help people, you have the responsibility to use it. 8 years later, 2037. Robert Sullivan died in prison at age 71, of a heart attack, alone in his cell. The news made headlines briefly. Teacher who murdered students dies in prison. But the story quickly faded. Sullivan himself had become irrelevant, a footnote to the much larger story of institutional reform and survivor advocacy that his crimes had inadvertently sparked. Maria Martinez, informed of his death by Sarah Chen, felt neither satisfaction nor disappointment. He's been dead to me since 2001, she said simply. This just makes it official. Serving over 500 students annually. It featured interviews with Sofia Rodriguez, who'd recently been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, for her work designing infrastructure in underserved communities. It included footage of schools across the country conducting training sessions based on Eva's law, teaching students and staff how to recognize and respond to predatory behavior. The documentary's most powerful moment came near the end. Maria Martinez, now 79, sitting in Eva's bedroom, which had been preserved as part of a small museum dedicated to Eva's life and legacy. Maria spoke directly to the camera, her face lined with age but her eyes still fierce. "People ask me if I've found peace," Maria said. "I tell them peace isn't possible when your child is murdered. But purpose is possible. Eva's death had purpose, not because I assigned it one, but because she fought back even when she was alone and afraid. She left us evidence. She left us her voice. And we finally listened." Maria held up Eva's journal. The original was in police evidence, but she kept a copy, its pages now worn from reading and rereading. "Every girl who reports harassment and is believed, that's Eva's voice. Every policy that prioritizes student safety over institutional reputation, that's Eva's voice. Every person who trusts their instincts instead of dismissing their fear, that's Eva's voice. My daughter speaks through all of them. She's building her bridges, just not the way we planned." 15 years later, 2044. Maria Martinez died peacefully in her sleep at age 84, surrounded by photographs of Eva and letters from the scholarship recipients who'd come to feel like extended family. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, former students, advocates, officials, survivors, and Sofia Rodriguez, who delivered the eulogy. "Maria taught me that love doesn't end with death," Sofia said, standing before the packed cathedral. "It transforms. It becomes action, advocacy, determination to honor memory through change." She loved Eva so much that she spent 43 years making sure her daughter's death meant something, saved others, created a legacy of protection and justice. Sofia paused, looking at Maria's casket. "Maria gave me my future. The scholarship she fought to create gave me MIT, gave me my career, gave me the ability to build bridges. Real, physical bridges that help people cross from one place to another, from one possibility to another. But she also taught me to build other kinds of bridges, between pain and purpose, between tragedy and transformation, between the way things were and the way things should be." After the funeral, Sofia stood at Eva's grave in the cemetery, reading the inscription she'd helped design. Eva Martinez, 1984 to 2001. Bridge builder, dream keeper, voice that would not be silenced. She tried to tell us. We finally learned to listen. Beside Eva's grave was a new one. Maria Martinez, 1961 to 2044. Eva's mother, Eva's voice, Eva's legacy, reunited at last. Sofia placed flowers on both graves, golden chrysanthemums for Eva, white roses for Maria, and made a silent promise to continue their work, to keep building bridges, to keep speaking their truth. 20 years later, 2049, the annual Eva Martinez Symposium on Institutional Accountability and Student Safety convened at MIT, now in its 15th year. The symposium brought together educators, law enforcement, policymakers, survivors, and advocates to discuss best practices and emerging challenges in protecting young people from predatory behavior. Sofia Rodriguez, now 44 and a tenured professor of structural engineering at MIT, opened the symposium with her traditional acknowledgement. "We gather in memory of Eva Martinez, Anna Chun, Brittany Foster, and Melissa Wright, young women whose lives were stolen by someone their community trusted. Their deaths created this space for learning, for policy development, for collective commitment to doing better. We honor them by listening to survivors, by implementing evidence-based protections, by never forgetting what it costs when we fail to believe young people who tell us they're afraid." The symposium's featured speaker was Claire Sullivan, now 67, who'd spent 2 decades as one of the country's leading advocates for children of perpetrators, helping them understand that their parents' crimes were not their burden to carry, while also acknowledging the complex trauma of loving someone capable of monstrous acts. "I was Robert Sullivan's daughter," Claire told the audience, as she'd done hundreds of times over the years, the words never getting easier but remaining necessary. "I loved him, I trusted him, and he was a serial predator who murdered at least 4 young women and traumatized dozens more. Both things can be true. The father I knew was real, kind to me, supportive of my education, present at my life events. But so was the predator. He contained multitudes, and the multitudes he contained included genuine evil. Claire continued, her voice steady with hard-won wisdom. Part of why predators like my father operate successfully for so long is because they're not monsters all the time. They're capable of genuine warmth, actual helpfulness, real connection. That's what makes them dangerous. That's what lets them get close to victims. We have to stop thinking of perpetrators as obviously evil figures lurking in shadows. They're teachers, coaches, clergy, family members, people we trust, people we love. Acknowledging that doesn't excuse them. It helps us recognize them. The symposium featured breakout sessions on emerging issues, online grooming in the digital age, artificial intelligence tools for detecting concerning patterns in communications, trauma-informed investigation techniques, restorative justice approaches for survivors. The field had evolved dramatically since 2001, when Eva Martinez had tried to report Sullivan's behavior and been dismissed. Now there were protocols, training programs, oversight mechanisms, legal protections. But vigilance remained essential. Predators evolved with the systems meant to stop them, finding new methods, exploiting new technologies, identifying fresh vulnerabilities. The work of protection was never complete. On the final day of the symposium, Sophia unveiled a new project, an online database of structural engineering educational resources dedicated to Eva's memory, free and accessible to students worldwide. The database included tutorials, design software, scholarship information, and mentorship opportunities. It was explicitly aimed at first-generation college students, particularly girls from underrepresented communities, the demographic Eva had belonged to, the group Sullivan had targeted. Eva wanted to build bridges for people like us, Sophia told the assembled crowd. People who need pathways from one world to another, from limited possibilities to unlimited potential. This database is one more bridge in her honor. Every student who uses these resources, who finds their way into engineering because the pathway was made clear and accessible, they're walking across a bridge Eva built, even if she never got to see it completed. 23 years later, October 2047. On the 46th anniversary of Eva Martinez's disappearance, the city of Asheville dedicated the Eva Martinez Memorial Bridge, an actual physical bridge designed by Sofia Rodriguez and her firm, spanning the French Broad River at the exact point Eva used to cross on her way to the library. The bridge was a marvel of engineering, elegant, efficient, incorporating sustainable materials and innovative design that had won international awards. But its real significance was symbolic. This was the bridge Eva had never built, the dream she'd been denied, finally realized by someone she'd inspired despite never meeting. Sophia spoke at the dedication ceremony, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd of thousands. Eva Martinez was 17 when she was murdered by someone she trusted, someone this community trusted. She was 17 when her dreams were stolen. But dreams are stubborn things. They survive. They transform. They pass from one dreamer to another like torches in darkness. Sophia gestured to the bridge behind her. This bridge physically connects two parts of our city. But symbolically, it connects past and future, tragedy and hope, silence and voice. Every person who crosses this bridge, whether walking, biking, driving, will be traveling on infrastructure that exists because Eva Martinez believed engineering could change lives. She was right. This bridge will serve this community for 100 years or more. That's legacy. That's immortality. That's the future Eva built, even from beyond death. As the sun set over the mountains and the bridge's lights, carefully designed to minimize light pollution while maximizing safety, flickered on, Sophia thought about the journey from that October day in 2001 to this moment. 46 years of grief, justice, reform, and slow, painful progress. 46 years of Eva's voice growing louder rather than fading, reaching further rather than diminishing. The bridge's entrance featured a plaque with Eva's photograph and a simple inscription: Eva Martinez Memorial Bridge. I believe that if you have the power to help people, you have the responsibility to use it. Eva Martinez, 2001. Sophia touched the plaque gently, a gesture she'd made hundreds of times at dozens of memorials, each touch a promise. I'm using my power. I'm helping people. I'm honoring you by living the life you didn't get to, by building the bridges you dreamed of, by making sure your silence became a voice that changed everything. As the ceremony concluded and people began walking across the bridge, families, students, elderly couples, children pointing excitedly at the river below, Sophia stayed behind, watching. Each person crossing was a validation of Eva's dreams, a fulfillment of her purpose, a bridge between who she'd been and what she'd created. The world was imperfect. Predators still existed. Young people were still vulnerable. Systems still sometimes failed. But because of Eva Martinez, because she tried to save herself and left evidence that ultimately saved others, the world was incrementally safer, incrementally more just, incrementally better at listening to voices that needed to be heard. 46 years later, Eva was still building bridges. And she always would be. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.